who were remembering things from the past.
How has your book been received beyond being an Amazon bestseller?
Well, it's been received extremely well. One thing that my foundation was surprised by was the absence of criticism from our supporters. We're a federal charity in Canada. We get support from individuals. We're one of the longest-standing environmental organizations in Canada, and we expected that we would come in for a fair amount of criticism, but that really wasn't the case. The public has really, at least, our supporters, our traditional supporters, who have been concerned in the past about the various issues that we've championed, such as conservation and renewable energy, alternate types of energy. They, with rare exceptions, perhaps just 3 or 4 critics, have warmly received the views that we've presented.
Let's talk about the case of the disappearing hockey stick that Dr. Edmund Wedgman, is that his last name?
Wegman.
Wegman discussed. Talk about that, because the hockey stick has been known as the poster child for the IPCC as symbolic evidence for man-made global warming. Share that a little bit.
Well, the hockey stick graph, as you say, was the poster child for the global warming movement. The long handle of the hockey stick represents most of the last 1,000 years, during which temperatures were said to be fairly stable, and then in the last 100 years, temperatures shot up, and that's the blade of the hockey stick, and that's why the hockey stick graph got its name. So that graph is the single biggest reason that the public became swayed to the idea that the Earth is warming dangerously. The graph showed almost 1,000 years of steady temperatures, and all of a sudden, in recent times, temperatures shooting up. Well, that graph, which the UN presented with great fanfare, and the press picked up with great fanfare, became challenged, and among the critics, the chief critics actually were a couple of Canadians. One was a Canadian statistician who worked with the mining industry. His name is Steve McIntyre, and he was actually a frustrated mathematician. He graduated from University of Toronto many years ago, had intended to take up an academic career, found himself working for a mining company, and in effect never quit the mining area. So his career was spent in mining. But when he saw the hockey stick graph, he said, "I recognize that graph. That's the graph that mining promoters use whenever they're touting a new claim." So he became suspicious of it, started looking into it, asked the authors of the graph for their data, found that they weren't forthcoming, started digging more and more, and came up with reasons to think that the graph might be bogus. Along the way, he teamed up with another academic, and together they started publishing studies discrediting the hockey stick graph. Well, this controversy ended up going to the U.S. Congress, and hearings were held, And the Congress decided to get a referee to see, well, who is right? Is it these two Canadians, or is it the UN scientists? And the person that the Congressional Committee got to act as referee was Edward Wakeman, who was one of the top statisticians in the U.S. He's a former chairman of the Committee of Applied and Theoretical Statistics of the National Academies of Sciences. So he put together a blue chip panel to investigate the claims, and then presented it to Congress. And he was actually shocked by what he found, and not just because he found that the UN's claims were bogus. He was shocked because the UN scientists who produced the hockey stick graph had no background in advanced statistics, which was the discipline required to actually produce their study. And he was further shocked to see that the peer reviewers of the hockey stick study didn't have any real knowledge of statistics. So with no one having any knowledge in the field, it's no wonder that that graph would be invalid. Essentially, what they discovered was that the hockey stick graph, the model that produced the hockey stick graph, would always produce a hockey stick shape, regardless of the data that you put into it. You could put baseball data into the hockey stick model, into that graph, and into that model, and you would get a hockey stick shape.
Absolutely frightening. And yet, this graph has been seen all over the world for how many years?
Oh, it's going on 2 decades now.
Let's talk about Roger Revelle, Gore's mentor, his professor, and the influence he had on Al Gore, and what we need to know that's relevant about Roger Revelle toward the end of his life.
Well, Revelle was a legendary scientist in the field. He inspired Al Gore. Al Gore has often referred to him as his mentor. But it turns out that Revelle didn't agree that global warming was necessarily catastrophic. He thought it should be studied. He thought there was a lot that needed to be pursued. But while Al Gore was warning the world of the great dangers, Revelle was writing letters to legislators saying, "Wait a minute, don't look before you leap. There's no reason to assume that any kind of catastrophe is around the corner."
At the end of his life, wasn't he declared senile, or people said he was senile?
Well, it did become nasty because Al Gore, to rescue his own reputation, did promote the view that Revelle had become senile, and that became an unpleasant episode.
In the field of science, is it possible to leave your post if you've been wrong about something? Is there any wiggle room for Al Gore to be able to stand up and say, "I was wrong. I'm an environmental advocate. I want to make the world better, but I've done some things that were wrong"? Do you think that's possible?
I don't expect to hear that from Al Gore. I think it takes an unusual person to admit wrongs of the scale that his have been.
The way that I evaluate whether there's shenanigans going on in an industry or in an arena is the quicker they close the case, the faster they squelch dissent, the harder the propaganda is, and the more hysterical the matter is to talk about, the more politicized it gets, the more trouble there is in the deep levels of it. And therefore, I really would like to talk about Antarctica with you, both the Arctic and Antarctica. we have seen so many snapshots and movies and videos of